Mage Storytime, Episode 29, Adventures in Babysitting. This is the continuing story of the Iron Goldfish, a party of role-players who awakened as mages. Our cast includes Alwi, who manipulates time with his phone; Bard, a mind and spirit mage who uses superheroes as his gods; Critical, who improves the luck of others through his own pain; Handy, a correspondence-using thief who steals items at long range; Kitty, who empowers his stickers and cats with spirits; Tello, a postmodern mage who uses a hodgepodge of skills to manipulate forces and matter; and Weeb, who uses his life skills to enhance his martial arts and Chinese medicine. It was the day of the inauguration. Most of us weren't political, but it was an occasion to get together, and we liked to get together and drink for whatever reason. So the Iron Goldfish were all assembled at Alwy's apartment on the evening of January 20th to watch the pageantry and punditry. Things seemed perfectly normal until a humanoid figure came crashing through one of the walls. He was covered in a motley assortment of rags and battle gear. Before we could react, he turned to Alwy and shouted, "Paradox this!" and kicked him into a glowing portal that had appeared. Then the figure sat down and started talking. "Hi, guys. Oh yeah, I remember watching this. It was boring the first time, too," said the older Alwy. Freaking time travel. As we figured out the time-traveling Alwy's origins, i.e. he was obviously a time traveler from the future, a barrage of questions hit him. Things like, do I regret dyeing my hair this color? What are next week's stock numbers? Do you ever stop sucking at games? And so on. At least we had our priorities straight. Time Alwy gave a pained look and waved us off. "Look," he said, "in the past few decades, I've mastered time magic. And I came with a dire warning. But they're coming for us, so we don't have more than a few minutes before shit hits the fan. Basically, Weeb, you did a pretty okay job as a parent for Webby, but not as good a job as the Dents did on the Doom Baby. Now there's a giant magical war between them and humanity is all but destroyed. So I decided to come back here, to give y'all a chance to fix things. We could go to the past and try to unsex Weeb, or we could try to fight them in the future, but we have to do something fast." All things considered, he had a pretty compelling case. What with being an older alternate version of our friend. We took it pretty seriously that we were in a kill baby Hitler kind of moment, so we might have to do something drastic. We thought giving the baby to the nickel values might also work, though, and we could try it and then check the timeline for positive changes. Before we could get a good start on our typical outside-the-box, read clinically insane, planning style, an alarm in Alwy's pocket started to go off, and he said the time trackers would be there any moment. We saw the air start to ripple and sparkle, then a bunch of portals began to open in the wall, and men in dark combat suits with bright W's on their chests started to step out and level guns at us. Handy opened a portal to our virtual space, and we piled through, closing the door behind us fast enough to prevent any pursuit. Well, one guy got through, but the automated defenses Weeb liked to set up in his spare time turned him into a greasy stain before a second passed. Things kept going like this. Every 10 to 15 minutes, whenever we were starting to get settled, the time goons would appear. Alwy told us they had homed in on his magical resonance, and so could follow him after recalibrating their instruments. We went from our apartment, to the digital shop, to a random park, to Cardiff, the Dyson Sphere, and finally even to Coyote's umbral realm, but the magic the goons was using was too powerful to be fully stopped. We kept moving, so we didn't actually have to deal with any of Webby's soldiers, but it was annoying. At least, it was pretty annoying until we managed to whip up a resonance field and attach it to one of the bracers that the Webby goon had lost, then toss the beacon into the Cloaca Dentata dimension. After that, we heard the occasional muffled scream, but we didn't have to hurry nearly as much. We decided that we needed to know exactly when Webby turned evil, as Alwy told us he had been fine to begin with. We figured it probably related to our, or at least Weeb's, eventual deaths. The problem was, as mages, we had the potential for very long lifespans, so we needed to have a better idea about what year we needed to try to influence. Unfortunately, Alwy had been traveling through time too long and too frequently to clearly remember when things happened. Weeb and Bard decided to team up with their mind magic and delve into Alwy's brains to get the answer that we needed. They were the only ones willing to go, having been friends with Alwy the longest, and thus assuming that they could handle his deviancy and darkness. Plus, they were pretty twisted themselves. Bard channeled one of his more powerful comic book psychics, and they traveled into the darkest corners of Alwy's inner consciousness. I don't know what they expected, But it wasn't an old movie theater filled with stacks and stacks of discarded film reels. A few had dates on them. Weeb found one labeled 71,082 and put it on the projector. The film showed an alien craft settling down on a desolated, lifeless, dust-strewn planet and setting up terraforming and colonization equipment. The caption said it was Earth in the 72nd millennium. Bard wished them luck and hoped they could take better care of the place than the previous occupants. The next film they found was 8120 and showed a pleasant agrarian society. Bard and Weeb decided they were probably recovering from some sort of technological apocalypse. But getting from a presumed post-apocalyptic hellscape to pre-modern agrarianism in under 6,000 years was a pretty good recovery rate, so they felt a little better. The next recording was much closer, taking us to a battlefield in 2766. We saw all sorts of destruction and bloodshed, but the most important feature was the large, stylized W's on the chest of many of the combatants. That meant either Webby's forces, or maybe a successor force that owed ideological allegiance to him. The Sons of Webby, or some such. It was only a memory, so we couldn't actually ask for directions, but we had narrowed the field somewhat. After that, the next memory we found was one of 4390, which was just kind of a dull cityscape. At this point, we had to move again, and Bard and Weeb informed the rest of the group that the going was both slow and random, although we did know that Webby would be a problem within 500 years, and would be gone within 6,000. That didn't narrow it down much, but it was technically more than we had known. Still, we needed to think of something else. We thought of building a mortality time limit into Webby to prevent him from growing too powerful, or making ourselves live forever, since the issue apparently was that we all died and poor Webby was stuck alone in a world full of assholes. Then Tello suggested we move Webby to a world where there were less assholes, or at least assholes who would be on his side. After all, we knew Cheap Cheap's Cloaca Dentata existed, so her universe, a D&D campaign where we had played evil, monstrous characters and conquered the world, must exist in some form as well. We couldn't think of more loving fathers than our bugbear paladin and psychotic necromancer, who was remarkably similar to Archimedes of the Order of Hermes. Plus, while they might be evil, not only were they nice and caring people, to other monsters and non-enemies at least, they were winning. So Webby would grow up safe, happy, and in a world where Dragonborn was just another type of person. It sounded ideal, but how to do it? Then Tello remembered that her character had become a universe-hopping, multiplanar wanderer with an adopted son that could travel between the strands of the multiverse. So there was some chance we could contact her, theoretically. It took some time for Tello's spirit allies to search, but they were strange creatures used to frequenting strange places, so it was only a matter of time before they located our Water Genasi quarry. Whereupon, Tello had a strange experience bartering with her own character. Gold wasn't of interest, nor were the comparatively paltry magic items we could lay claim to, but finally we offered a crossbow that could throw fireballs at her enemies. In other words, a plasma gun. That and saying we would get some former feline companions to accompany her sealed the deal, and Tello's character agreed to help us transport across the interdimensional barriers, and make some introductions once we were on the other side. The child that was accompanying the Water Genasi, a small boy of about 8 or 9 dressed in a tailored business suit, gestured with his hand and we all felt ourselves being stretched across reality. One blurp later and we were in the D&D dimension. Lacking any specific instructions, our multiversal guide took us to the last place in the universe she had been, the jungle-covered island continent of Cholt. We landed on the beach outside the main ports and could see a sorceress changeling directing a group of zombie laborers. We recognized him as Weeb's former character, who had joined the rest of our evil party in taking over the world. So while this world might be safe from the Time Goons, it wasn't exactly wholesome and friendly. Bard had thought that was intentional, and we were going to give Webby to the evil, world-conquering necromancer Archimedes. That way she would be safe, happy, and have a world all her own to conquer. Tello and all we agreed with that idea, but Weeb was not up for abandoning his child, or letting him become a world-starting tyrant. Instead, he was going to take the child and roam around the world doing deeds, lone wolf and cub style. The changeling noticed us and started to walk over, so we decided to get out of Dodge before we upset the locals. Handy opened up a portal for us, noting how easy magic was to do in this world, and we stepped through onto a distant island with a lot less zombies on it. All of us except for Weeb and Webby, however. Toying with the field of gravity around himself, our party member grabbed his child, said he trusted us to save the world, and took off into the sky, apparently intent on never seeing us or returning to our world again. We were a pretty dejected group when we reconvened at Oman Island, where our portal had emptied out. When we stopped, Future Always cast his mind into the future again to check on the results of our actions. Webby still conquered the world, but the colors on the goon uniforms were more colorful, magic was more abundant and open, and the whole atmosphere was generally a bit less oppressive. Still tyrannical, but a bit friendlier on the whole. So, progress. Weeb wasn't sure what he expected to see as he flew along, sun in tow. Maybe a few birds or the odd dragon. He did not expect to see an ancient man floating towards him. At a little distance, he noticed that the man looked amazingly like his sometimes mentor from the Hermetic Order, Archimedes. The only difference was the hair and clothing, which seemed more appropriate for the medieval-style world we found ourselves in at the moment. When he saw and recognized Weeb, though, the old man shook himself in the air and his clothing changed to the modern bathrobe and bunny slippers we were used to. "What the hell are you doing in my playground, kid?" he shouted at Weeb. Trying to raise my child so he doesn't become a supervillain and take over the world? What are you doing here? Well, this is my play area. I relax here and take over the world, because people get upset if I do it in the other universe. And I don't like sharing my toys. So why should I let you stay? Well, a child's life is at stake? When Archimedes looked confused, Weeb continued, "You know the Iron Goldfish. My child is destined to be a future world-conquering tyrant. We're looking at a kill baby Hitler moment here. How do you think my crew will react?" Archimedes conceded the point, but still wasn't convinced to share his playground universe. He studied the mage and the child for a few moments, then agreed that they could stay for a few days. The problem was, even Archimedes, with his power, couldn't stay in the universe for long. Something about the magical resonance of the universe interacted poorly with our own resonances. The more powerful someone was, the more this inverse paradox would affect them, at least in this world. It was basically a sort of magical cancer, which would start affecting Weeb after a week or so of constant exposure. Although Webby, since he hadn't awakened yet, might be fine. Around this time, the rest of the party made telepathic contact with Weeb. It had only been about half an hour, but they missed him. Also, they had been planning to steal him a magical sword of justice as a parting gift and needed to know where to deliver the goods. Weeb relayed the bad news about the magic cancer and the need to leave the universe. Bard relayed the bad news that they were currently seeing the sparkles and ripples that indicated inbound time goons, which had just started to appear in the air around Future Always. Several of us wondered why Weeb wasn't seeing any, since Webby was the target of the goons, we thought, but we were too concerned with moving to worry about it for long. We decided to retreat back to Cholt, where the local zombie hordes could be maneuvered between us and our pursuers. We kind of stood out, being paler than most Choltians, but it was a port town, so there was some diversity. Plus, we all had little devices that made us less readily noticeable, courtesy of our craftier comrades and their work some months before. Still, our Genasi guide and her child needed something in the way of a disguise, so Bard channeled the spirit of the quintessential mild-mannered alter ego and gave both of them a pair of glasses. It was the perfect cover, at least according to his comic book sensibilities. For his part, Weeb decided to avoid Cholt, since that was where the goons were appearing. Instead, he used his magical senses to track down a pack of local hags. He was intent on learning the curse that allowed our Water Genasi's guide's child to move through the universes. The hags didn't want to teach him at first, and made the mistake of trying to attack him and the child, so he killed and ate two of the trio just to show the third he meant business. It helped that our magic was a lot more freeform and reality-breaking than the local stuff, so Weeb was vastly overpowered. The hag agreed to his reasonable demands for tutelage, and taught him the curse as quickly as possible to get him to go away. Meanwhile, back on Cholt, the party had gone to ground in the nearest bar, and were busy getting sloshed. Well, most were. Critical and handy were our sober monitors, while Bard was introducing the medieval fantasy world to cannabis, but we were having a good time. It may seem like a terrible plan to get fucked up when we were under imminent attack by time ninjas, but it actually worked. Handy watched out the windows as the portals kept opening up right before the agent that came through got lost in the sea of people. We were safe in our alcoholic haven. We sent a runner out for the feline guides that we owed to our Genasi friend, and between the party of drunken mages and the random mooks teleporting into town, they decided that it would be safer for their health to make themselves scarce. As Weeb flew along, looking for a safe place to settle and practice his new curse, he decided he needed a new form to make the flying easier. He shapeshifted into a gold dragon form, then settled Webby on his back and took off. After a little while, as he came over the mainland, he felt his magical senses tingle. Miles away, at the end of his vision, he saw a pair of huge, spidery figures standing on a hillside jutting out of a forest. As he approached, the shapes resolved themselves into the form of large driders, elf bodies coming out of giant spider thoraxes. One was a strange blend of mechanical and biological, and the other oozed magical power. Sensing their malevolence, Weeb changed his color to black, but it didn't do him any good. As he got closer, the mystic figure shouted, "Who dares encroach on the realm of Lolth? How dare you insult me?" And she started gesturing and shouting wildly. Weeb decided he didn't want to get close to the spider goddess, so he pulled back. He was far enough away to be out of range, but the goddess began summoning demons, some of which started to take to the air. Thinking quickly, Weeb made his body malleable and pulled a chunk of scales off his chest, about 10 pounds worth, then turned it into fissionable material. A ballistic missile was summoned and launched in the direction of the vengeful goddess. Welcome to the nuclear age, sucker. The resulting mushroom cloud didn't kill the goddess or all of her minions, but it did leave a new crater in the landscape and gave Weeb plenty of time to get away, which he did through a portal before the blast hit him and Webby. While Weeb's luck was holding steady, it started to run out for the rest of us. The portals started appearing more and more quickly, filling the sky over the port town with dozens, maybe hundreds of glowing orangish discs, out of which poured the Webbian forces. It looked like something out of a movie. From out of the air came a peevish older voice shouting, "The hell did you fools bring here?" When we told Archimedes we had no idea, he insisted that if we were going to break his toys, we help him clean up. We decided that cleaning up our messes didn't really sound like an us thing. Archimedes reworded his request from clean up to blow up the mess, and we agreed that sounded like us. One quick portal from Handy, and we were at the edge of town where the greatest number of portals were opening, getting a good view of the ancient archmage lashing out with bolts of energy and sheer willpower. With a shrug, we summoned our powers and charged into the melee. The goons were getting blasted apart left and right, which allowed us to notice something a bit odd about them. When Handy put an arrow through one guy's face, a bunch of bluish fluid leaked out. And when Bard took one's head off, we all got to see that it was made of strange wires and ballistic gel. Oh goody, robots. So they were basically an endless horde. But at least we didn't have to feel bad about killing them. Which we totally would have done otherwise. Really. With that new knowledge, we laid into them with everything we had. We were doing a lot of damage, but the thing about endless hordes is that they're endless. And after a little while, the numbers started to tell. Even when we mystically redirected several portals into the sun, and the Cloaca Dentata dimension, it didn't do much to stem the tide. Future Alwi was too drunk to fight, but Bard smashed, Critical twisted fate, Tello blasted them, Kitty supported us, and Handy kept pulling grenades out of his bag and shouting, "Fireball!" But it wasn't enough, and we had to fall back. Luckily, they seemed to be firing rings of energy that tingled more than hurt, although Critical took a few blasts and started to feel sluggish and numb, if not necessarily harmed. Tello tried to take one of the robots captive for interrogation, but it twisted itself inhumanly out of her grasp. Despite Bard's insistence, it did not, in fact, pop and lock its way to freedom. For his part, Bard decided his regular heroes didn't have enough AoE attacks to deal with the masses, so he tried someone with a bit more oomph. One call later, and his hair was standing up in two bunny-like protrusions as he shouted, "Don't be afraid, everyone! I am here!" And with a shout of, "Texas Smash!" he plunged into the crowd. Unfortunately, he was so giddy at his success that he got overconfident, and he was brought down after only a dozen or so mighty blows. The rest of the party took this as a bad sign and fell back even further, unable to get to their fallen comrade for the moment. But they could still hear him shouting and cursing, so he was probably fine. Seeing one of our tanks fall, Handy opened his magic bag, set it to link up with the bottom of the nearby ocean, and unleashed a narrowly concentrated flood to push back the waves of robotic mooks. It worked like a super-powered riot hose. It actually blasted a few limbs off the first ranks, and sent several stumbling back into the portal. Handy pulled a pair of sunglasses out of somewhere and said, "Looks like you're all washed up." Kitty helpfully shouted, "Yeah!" But when the horde kept closing in, Handy decided the situation was fucked and abandoned the rest of us. Stalwart heroes of the realm, we are. For his part, Weeb's escape from the nuclear blast had managed to mix his own power with a nuclear explosion, which was not a good thing. He closed his eyes, gripped Webby tightly, and tried to think happy thoughts. After a minute, when he didn't evaporate in a blaze of nuclear fire, he opened his eyes again. He was standing in Always' apartment on the night we had first been awakened. Fortunately, everyone was too drugged to notice his presence. Except for a large adult dragonborn that popped into the air beside him, growled, "Damn it, Dad, quit trying to mess with the timeline," and yanked Weeb and his baby through another portal. When the trio popped out again, they were standing in a marble terrace overlooking a futuristic park. Adult Webby sighed and said, "So where is Uncle Awie this time?" Weeb really didn't know how to answer, taken aback by his sudden appearance. Finally, he gave his son a big hug and said, "He's in the D&D realm, boy." Webby groaned and started to complain about having been left to deal with such a handful. It was around this time that a panicked Handy, who had been homing in on Weeb's energy signature, landed in the park. He started babbling about robot Webbians and a massive invading horde, which caused Weeb to look at his son. "Boy, if anything, I'm more offended that you would send massive waves of worthless grunts to take us on. I mean, you have to have heard the stories, right? Or are these guys just being punished for something?" And that was when Webby set everything straight. "Uncle Handy, it's great to see you. But you know what Uncle Awie's like. He got out of his his high-security enforced retirement home, and started running amok. Again. In fact, he's done it so often I have automated sentries that immediately start portaling after him whenever he gets out and try to use their stun blasters on him. He destroys a few waves, gets tuckered out, and then I send in actual people to retrieve him. I think he thinks it's a game." By this time, the group had portaled back to the rest of us, and with a wave, Webby made the robots stand down and retreat. A few small squads were detailed to repair any damage, while Webby explained that it was all Awie's fault. We took this in stride, but an hour or so later, when young Awie was returned to us, Bard greeted him with a superpowered punch straight to the taint, and a shout of, "In 700 years, you'll know why, dumbass." It took a little while to convince Archimedes that everything was cool now. He was far from happy, but apparently knew Webby, at least enough not to want a confrontation. Weeb was a far bigger problem, as he wouldn't stop gushing over his awesome son. He even made himself a "My son is your glorious overlord" bumper sticker. We did our best to ignore him, but it wasn't easy. A cackling future Awie was led away by kind robots, but as he went he gestured over his shoulder, opening a portal out of which our Awie tumbled with a shrieking cry of, "What just happened?" Then Bard hit him in the crotch and his voice went even higher. After he had healed, we explained everything, along with the fact that he turned into a douche in the future. Well, turn was a hard word, maybe more of a slight veer. Before we returned to our universe and time, the Dragonborn treated us to a magnificent feast and a tour of the utopian dictatorship he had set up after conquering the world. As dystopia go, it was pretty nice. Very clean and pleasant. Plus there were giant statues of each of us, so that was neat. That may have also disincentivized us from asking about any magical wars or oppression. Webby left us then, shaking off the hugs of his father with a cry of, "Dad! Not in front of my minions!" Weeb was impossible to live with when he finally got back, until Handy helpfully informed him that Webby's future wasn't certain, just possible. That took the wind out of his sails. For maybe 3 seconds, then he went full protective Papa Wolf, ready to kill anyone who looked at him or Webby funny. I guess having kids doesn't really change him all that much. Will Webby fulfill his destiny of overlordhood? Will the future really be bright, or is it a false hope? Will Weeb ever calm his tits about the brat? Find out in the next Mage Storytime.